All right, guys, we're going to do a quick overview of some vocab as we move into our new unit. I'm going to go kind of quick because I only get 10 minutes on my screencast app, so let's get started. REQ, how did feudalism control people but weaken state power? All right. First term we have is Eurasia. We've seen this term in a certain context prior when we talked about Afro-Eurasia and the Americas. Remember, this is just a large landmass. It includes two continents, Europe and Asia. These are two separate continents, and within each of these continents, you then have several countries. The continent we're going to focus on is Europe. That is right around here, if you can see my cursor. In Europe, we have Ireland, we have England, we have Scotland, we have Spain, France. This is where the Roman Empire was previously. So right here where my cursor is, that's the Mediterranean. Prior to the time period we're moving into, the Roman Empire had united all of the Mediterranean Sea. Well, as we move forward, remember we talked about the fall of Rome. We're moving into the Middle Ages. If I'm moving too quick, go back and pause. Make sure you're filling out your notes on your worksheet as you are watching the video. As Rome falls, remember, we have all those Germanic tribes that are lingering on the borders of the Roman Empire. And as Rome is facing these military issues, these money issues, these leadership issues, it's the perfect storm, the perfect combination. It gives these Germanic tribes the opportunity to move into former Roman lands. Well, what ends up happening, you have these leaders of these tribes, like the Franks, like the Goths, who kind of rise up and take power of their tribe. They establish kingdoms or their own little states in these former Roman territories and basically deem themselves as the head of that territory. They become kings. So what you get is where you had former Roman provinces, you get a lot of small kingdoms, and they're all divided. They're all different. They often battle against each other. Well, this period of time where you have all these different, see all these different colors on the screen, you have all these different small kingdoms. This time period becomes known as the Middle Ages. And yes, if you've ever been to medieval times, this is the time where we get castles, we get knights, we have jousting, we have kings and queens. It's a lot of fun, one of my favorite topics. As we have these small kingdoms, these different kingdoms that are arising, you get this guy named Charlemagne, whom actually manages to conquer several of these small kingdoms and unite them. But this is the thing. He doesn't just unite them because he's conquering all of them, not in the way that the Roman Empire did. What he actually does that makes a big splash is he starts spreading religion. Remember, as Rome is falling, we're getting the rise of Christianity simultaneously. Well, he ends up building schools, sending monks around to preach the word of God. He sets up monasteries. So he ends up spreading Christianity to the point where even though you have all of these different kingdoms that were often fighting against each other, the one thing that they have in common is religion. It gets to the point where the church actually has more power than all of the kings and queens. So this guy, Pope Leo III, he's the head of the church. He ends up crowning Charlemagne emperor of the Romans because he had united so much of the former Roman Empire. And eventually, and we'll get to this later, the church actually has more power than the kings and queens. So you've got all these small little kingdoms and you've got kings and queens running them. And then you have the church, which kind of runs all the kingdoms. And like I said, we'll get to that later. Moving on to our next term, Vikings. These are fierce men and women. They are fierce warriors, and they basically would raid anywhere that they could. But what separated them from other people, like the Germanic tribes, like the barbarians, is that they used long ships, which allowed them to sail upriver. Now, this is the thing. Prior to this, people that lived on the coast were always in danger because somebody could just roll up from the ocean. But people that lived inland thought they were safe. Well, not anymore. These guys could go upriver. They could reach these inland cities. So basically, no one was safe. And what they would do, they would sail their ship right up onto the land, hop off, storm the village, storm the castle, storm wherever they were. They had these quick, swift raids. They'd attack, they'd kill. These were brutal attacks. They would kill everyone, take everything. Maybe they'd hang out there for a couple days, and then they'd move on to the next. So they pose a major threat, which means these kings that are running these small kingdoms, they can't protect their people anymore. So what ends up happening is you got these kings that are controlling entire kingdoms, and then you've got nobles. These are landowners, wealthy people that own plots of land. Well, the king can't provide them protection, so the nobles are on their own to protect their land. So they end up hiring knights. Knights are warriors that fought on horseback, and basically what they would do is exchange their service for a piece of their noble's land. Remember, at this point in time, not everyone owns land. So a noble would say to a knight, hey, I'll give you a piece of my land to live on. It's called a fief, if you promise to be ready to fight as soon as I need you. So they would make this deal, again, because they would get land in exchange. Well, our next term, vassals. Vassals were knights who promised to protect a lord. So they basically make this, they basically sign a contract. They swear loyalty to them, saying, I will be ready to fight as soon as you call me, as soon as you need me. I've got your back. You can count on me. And then in return, the noble will give them land, called a fief. They'd give them weapons, armor, and horses. But most importantly, they would give them land. And land back then was money. If you had land, that meant you had status, you had wealth, you were someone in society, because most people did not own any land. All right? So this, again, leads us to our next term, feudalism. This is a system of promises that governs the relationship between lords and vassals. If this is seeming like a lot right now, don't stress. This is just an overview to kind of expose you guys to these terms. So again, this is a system of promises. Basically, in society, what we have right now are kings and queens, nobles, lords, knights or vassals, peasants, and serfs. So the kings and queens are the people that run the kingdom. So I want you to think of this like Dr. Yee. She runs Sierra. Then you have nobles and lords. These are people that own land. So think of this as teachers. We all own land. We have our own classroom. Well, then we need vassals to protect our land. So we might choose like 1 or 2 students in each class to protect our land. And in exchange, those 1 or 2 students will get a piece of land to call their own. Everyone else, all the rest of the students that we haven't selected to protect our land, those are peasants. They own no land. All they do is work land. They farm, they make clothes, they provide all of the goods. Life is not great for them, and that is the bulk of society. So again, if you got the opportunity to be a knight or a vassal, you wanted to, because if you had land, you had status. Go ahead and take a look at this pyramid. This again is just showing you kings and queens at the top, church officials and nobles underneath that, which we'll get to, knights, and then peasants and serfs. And again, this is the bulk of society. All right, our next term, castles. We're probably all familiar with this. The reason they built up these castles was because they could be easily defended against attacks. Remember, those Vikings, they're coming in hot on their longships. They're jumping out, attacking people. Well, the reason they needed to build castles was because of these attacks. One thing, though, is that a lot of modern castles are built out of stone, but in the very beginning, they were actually made out of wood. That is important. All right. I'm running out of time. Our next term, the medieval manor. This is a large estate owned by a knight or a lord. Basically, you would have an entire little city because, again, not everyone owned land. So I'm going to take you to the next slide. So on the manor, you have over here, this is the big house where the Lord lives. This is all of his land. And I say his because it was predominantly men. So over here, you've got his house, all right? Then you're going to have the village church right over here. And then you're going to have peasants farming in the fields over here. All right, you might have a village blacksmith. Here's where the peasants live. But you're going to have like your own little self-contained society all within this one plot of land that, again, the Lord owns. So, again, you've got the large house. That's the castle where the noble lives. You've got the village church. You've got the pastures in the fields. You might have a blacksmith. It's a self-contained little city all on one plot of land. All right. Last term, we've got our serfs, our peasants. Again, these guys, these men and women have no land. The men work, they farm the fields. Women make clothing, they cook, they grew vegetables, they gather wood. They receive a very teeny piece of land, but they don't own it. They just get to live on it. And protection. That's why they do it, because the knights that are protecting the nobles are protecting the peasants as well. All right, I am out of time. Again, make sure you filled out your notes. Go back and view each slide if you need to. Make sure your assignment is complete.